All right, everyone. Well, welcome to our next class of the roots and results of anti-Semitism. We sort of went through the origins of anti-Semitism. Um, we talked about the religious nature of anti-Semitism in the early period, coming out of pagan and into Christian history. We talked about the Middle Ages. We came into the more modern time through Enlightenment and the Holocaust, and we saw anti-Semitism morph from a religious-based anti-Semitism into a race science-based anti-Semitism. The religious-based anti-Semitism culminated in the Inquisitions, really, during the Middle Ages, and the race and science-based anti-Semitism culminated in the Holocaust. We are now in a new time, and anti-Semitism has once again started to morph. But what we're going to see is some of the main ideas that we've seen from anti-Semitism all the way through are still there. And we're going to see how they work their way back in, and really are still a part of anti-Semitism today. So we're going to talk about the old and the new, right? What are the things that are, a continuation, and what are the things that we're now seeing that are new, and how do they differentiate? I'm going to encourage people, if you don't have sound on, or high enough, to make sure we're going to see a number of video clips today. So just be aware I'm optimizing for the video clips, so hopefully you'll be able to hear it. This comes out of the ADL. This actually is from 2018. And I looked for one that was newer. They have audits that are newer, but they don't have this great little video that they put out. So I'm going to do the 2018 video, and then I'm going to show you some numbers from more recently.
To rid America of the traitorous Jews like Dianne Feinstein. Vote for Patrick Little for U.S. Senator from California.
All right, so that was 2018 audit, which means they were probably working from 2017 numbers, although I don't remember exactly when the ADL did this, if this was earlier in the year or later in the year. But as we start to understand, right, whether it's 2017 or 18, it's about the same. 2018 actually dropped a little bit. In 2017, there were 1,986 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. 2018, there were 1,879 incidents. We're talking about a whole different category when we look at 2022 and 2023. We haven't even gotten all of those numbers yet. They're still in the process of doing their audit of everything. It is almost double, not quite, but almost double what it is that it was back then. So what are we seeing? What does anti-Semitism today sort of look like? What we're starting to see is a realization that, religious anti-Semitism doesn't really work, because, you're not supposed to be biased against people's religion. Racial anti-Semitism after the Holocaust has become sort of unacceptable in mainstream society, although that's changed. And we're starting to see a little bit of a backslide towards that. And so anti-Semitism really has evolved once again into a different form. And we see the former foreign minister of Israel, Abba Eban, in 1973, made the following statement. One of the chief tasks of any dialogue with the Gentile world is to prove that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism. The old classic anti-Semitism declared that equal rights belong to all individuals within the society except the Jews. The new anti-Semitism says that the right to establish and maintain an independent national sovereign state is the prerogative of all nations, so long as they don't happen to be Jewish. We're going to talk a lot today about this idea of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism versus anti-Israel rhetoric, and we're going to speak a little bit today and then a lot more next week when we focus on Israel in particular, about how do we distinguish between the two, right? Let me start by saying even now, it is perfectly acceptable to have critiques of any government, whether it be the Israeli government, the American government, you pick your government. It is perfectly, acceptable to have critiques of that. Anybody who follows Israeli news or Israeli press knows that it's one of the pastimes, right? Political criticism and commentary is a sport in Israel, right? It's everybody sort of does it. So we're going to have to figure out at some point in time, is there a way to distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism? And that's going to be a major topic of conversation actually next week as we focus on Israel in particular. We're talking about today's anti-Semitism. We are going to lean on a professor by the name of Erwin Kotler. He's a professor at McGill University, and he has come up with what he considers to be sort of the 9 aspects of new anti-Semitism. The first, he sort of categorizes as genocidal anti-Semitism, right? Calling for the destruction of Israel and destruction of Jewish people. Sometimes it's couched and hidden, but sometimes it's not. There are people that are out there calling for the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the Jewish people in no uncertain terms. That's genocidal anti-Semitism, trying to get rid of the people, trying to get rid of the state. And that is one of the aspects, one of the types of anti-Semitism that we see now in the modern world. The second is what he titles political anti-Semitism. And that is focused on a denial of Jewish people and denial that they have a right to self-determination. They have a right to have their own state. And we see then an attribution of anything that Israel does is evil. This political entity is evil. And we're not talking about any government. It doesn't matter, a left-wing government, a right-wing government, it is evil because it is Israel. And I want to make that distinction, because you can say this government is evil, or that government is evil, or does evil things, and we can have that conversation. But when you say any government that Israel has, anything that Israel does is evil, that's a different story. The next is what we call ideological anti-Semitism. And it really is comparing Zionism to racism. It's Nazifying Zionism. And next week, we're going to spend a little bit of time learning about Zionism, because one of the biggest challenges that we have is when people say, well, Zionism is racism, they create a structure by which they define Zionism in order to say that it's racism. Well, but that's not how I define Zionism. So how do we define Zionism? What is Zionism? And then let's determine if it's racism. We also have what we call theological anti-Semitism, right? We see this with Islamic anti-Semitism on the one side of things, and we still see a Christian replacement theology that is stemming really from the Middle Ages that we were talking about. That hasn't gone away. And in some parts of the world and in some communities, that replacement theology and that brings anti-Semitism from the Christian perspective, as well as from the Islamic perspective. We see a cultural anti-Semitism. And that is sort of this attempt by intellectuals to denigrate Israel and Jewish ideas and those sorts of things. It's become sort of a culturally appropriate to diss Israel, to diss Jews. We see an economical anti-Semitism, which is sort of directed and focused through the BDF movements and all of these sort of countries that are trying to restrict or punish Israel and Jews sometimes collectively, economically. We see, as a result of the Holocaust, Holocaust denial as a type of anti-Semitism. It didn't happen. We see that, unfortunately, even with October 7th. It didn't happen. It was harder. It's harder for the Holocaust deniers. It's a little bit easier for the October 7th deniers, because their claim is it's all AI, right? And AI now can create all of this stuff, all of these pictures and things like that. And we just had this whole big thing about Taylor Swift and explicit images that were on the internet that were all AI generated. It's very possible to generate all sorts of images. And by the way, it's something that people do. It's not to say that people don't. But their denial of October 7th is to say it's AI. You can't say it's AI from the Holocaust. They didn't have it back then. You can say it's fabrications, but it's a little bit different. There is racist, absolute, the same way that some people are racist against African Americans, racist against Latinos, racist against Asians. That is still part of what an origin or a type of anti-Semitism. And then he adds this other category, which is a little bit more esoteric, and it's this international sort of group of people that are trying to deny Israel equality in the international arena. It's a very specific and a very focused process. And these are the 9 types of or aspects of anti-Semitism that he has identified in the modern times. And so what we see is this is much more complex than previous iterations. You can agree or disagree, did the Jews kill Jesus? But it's pretty straightforward. And, you can try to argue the blood libels and stuff like that, but it's pretty straightforward. But when you now have to deal with all 9 of these as possibilities, where do you start? How do you approach this? How do you even begin to make any headway against all of this? Barb.
I didn't see on that list that Jews are controlling the world. They control the media, they control the banks, they control Hollywood. When they talk about the words in the news like elite, the elites are doing X, Y, or Z. I mean, it's just code for Jew. So I didn't see that in there, which
it's tied into a bunch of them, right? Depending on what the claim is, it could be economic, it could be a number of different things. It could just be racial. Right? There are racial stereotypes that have come through, and whether it's true or not, it's a racial, right? I don't, if you've been in business with Jews, right, and you've had a bad experience, that's one thing, right? And you can say, well, I had this bad experience. But if you just say Jews are only interested in money, that's a racial stereotype. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. So that's hidden in these other aspects, and it depends where it's coming from.
I had one other question too. When
Sure.
they look at the ADL hate crimes, who's who's perpetrating most of those? I mean, you know, maybe at one point there was Muslims doing it. Maybe that'll be again. But who's perpetrating most of these hate crimes?
There is not it changes from year to year in terms of who is actually the majority of perpetrators. We're going to talk today a lot about the difference between anti-Semitism from the right and anti-Semitism from the left, and we're going to see that on both sides we have perpetrators.
Yeah, forget about
right? So
that.
it depends what type of anti-Semitic issue. So if you want to talk about, creating fear on a college campus, well, that's going to be mostly people on the left. If you want to talk about Poway shooting, well, that's going to be somebody from the right.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And so it depends. There's a number of different things. Howie asked, does ADL classify incidents like the testimonies from college presidents in Congress? It's a really good question. I don't think they probably classified it as such, but I could ask. I don't know how they classify that testimony, and if they would mark that as an anti-Semitic incident in their statistics. It certainly speaks to a reality, but I don't know if they actually keep that in their numbers. It's a really good question. Peter.
As a kid, if someone was being anti-Semitic around you, you'd get an offhand, off-color remark. Today, with the internet and social media, you get small voices that have become very big voices, which is the biggest problem. You don't know how many people are behind that voice. It's just that they're getting a bigger audience.
Correct. The tools of
the
communication.
biggest problem.
Yeah. The tools of communication and what we have at our disposal is far better than what was around in Germany during the Holocaust. And we saw how effective it was even back then. And all the more so now.
And the radical lefts and rights search them out and have 100%. The ability to find them
100%.
A lot more that validates their positions.
Well, that's the other thing is, that's the other thing is that, social media is not a free and open discussion, even when you're talking to people, right? Social media is based on algorithms, and social media is deciding what you're going to see and what you're not going to see and who you're going to listen to and who you're not going to listen to. And it shapes the conversation. It's not just, the reality is, as much as it's a difficult conversation to have in the quad of a college, if you've got pro-Israel and anti-Israel people yelling and screaming at each other, right? It's actually a free and open conversation. It's not a pleasant one, but at least you've got people that are there and people that are, right? But social media doesn't allow that to happen in the same way. And by the way, some colleges don't either, which is a whole different issue. All right, let me continue on. We've got a lot to talk about today. So we've got the use of old ideas in the modern world as part of what we're seeing today. We've got attacks on Zionism as a concept, attacks on the state of Israel. We've got to focus on college campuses in a way we've never seen before. This has been going on for a while, but it is continuing to ramp up and continuing to be there. And that's sort of what we saw, that even the administration, even when an administration is not in and of themselves anti-Semitic, they're struggling to actually control it on their campuses. We have an exclusion of Jews from social and political and academic realms that we haven't seen in a long time, right? We saw that in Germany, we saw that in the Middle Ages, but for a long time, Jews could go anywhere and be anything and do anything. And all of a sudden now, we see the Women's March, and they're saying, well, no, if you're a Jew, you can't. If you're a Jew, you can't be part of it. Or we see some other organizations that are LGBTQ connected and things like that. They're saying, well, if you support Israel, if you're Jewish, you can't be part of that. And so we see this exclusion that is starting to happen now. And we see the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. And for the first time really the first time. We are seeing it on the right and on the left simultaneously. I've said this numerous times before. Leave it to the Jews to be the only ones to be able to unite the radical left and the radical right. The only thing they agree on is they all hate us. Right? So we're going to sort of talk about these over the course of today and next week in terms of how they're manifesting itself and then what we can potentially do. Some of the old stuff is still around, right? We talked a lot about blood libels. We have blood libels, those accusations that are still happening in the modern world, right? We see that in connection to Israel. We see that connection to the evil-looking Jew. The one on the bottom left is literally a blood libel, right? The Jew drinking the blood. We also see this idea of the Jewish conspiracy, right? That the Jews are taking over the world, controlling the media. We were talking about that earlier. It started with this idea of the protocols of the elders of Zion, right? This conspiracy theory that the Jews are controlling everything. And that the evil Jews are trying to take over the world and destroy Christianity. It goes back to this idea of Jews want to destroy us, we good Christians. By the way, it's usually we good white Christians. I'll add that in there, but we Christians. And it's happening today, now, right? Pastor Rick Wiles is senior pastor at Flowing Streams Church. He's the founder of True News. This is a little bit old. This is from November. The clip I'm going to show you is from 2019, but it's just a few years ago. Let me optimize again for you guys.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda. This impeach Trump movement is a Jew coup. And the American people better wake up to it really fast, because this thing is moving now towards a vote in the House and then a trial in the Senate. We could have a trial before Christmas. This country could be in civil war at Christmas time.
That's right.
Members of the U.S. military are going to have to take a stand, just like they did in the 1860s with the Civil War. They're going to have to decide, are you fighting for the North or the South? Members of the government are going to have to take a side. Instead of North, South, it's going to be left or right. People are going to be forced, possibly by this Christmas, to take a stand because of this Jew coup in the United States. We have weeks to stop it. That's why I'm speaking out. That's why I'm putting everything on the line, saying this is a coup led by Jews to overthrow the constitutionally elected president of the United States. And it's beyond removing Donald Trump. It's removing you and me. That's what's at the heart of it.
That's right.
You have been taken to tell you, the church, they're coming for you. There will be a purge. That's the next thing that happens when Jews take over a country. They kill millions of Christians.
All right. So this was in the midst of all the craziness that was going on, right? At the end of Trump's presidency. And the reason for all of this, according to this pastor, is clearly the Jews. All of the problems, all of the issues that this United States had around January 6th, right? This interview happened before that, obviously, was all because of the Jews. So we see anti-Semitism from the right taking on these types of tropes, right? It was the same tropes that we saw from the Nazis, from fascist Germany. As a matter of fact, we see them picking up those same symbols. It's not even, just by association. The Jews, it's because of the Jews that the ills of the world happen. And these people were always here. It's not that they weren't disappeared after the Holocaust, but they went behind the scenes. It was not gauche. It was not gauche. It was not appropriate for them to be out in the open. But that really changed in the last 6 years or so. And now it's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable to get on a news channel and to talk about the Jew coup. And nobody says anything. So they reemerged back out into the open. And they are looking for people, right? They would like the world to follow them and to lead into another Holocaust, ultimately.
Back in New York, our Adam Waffen source, John, agreed to talk over video chat with me and my colleague Ollie Winston.
So Adam Waffen Division itself, a Nazi extremist group seeking to spread terror. The main thing is lone wolf activity.
When you say lone wolf attacks, it sounds to me like you're talking about basically terrorist acts.
Yeah, they don't see themselves as terrorists, rather they see the United States as the ultimate terrorist. Like what Adolf Hitler said, how do you meet terrorism? You meet it with stronger terrorism. Adam Waffen is made up of about 60 guys, and then you have what is called initiates. That guys were in the process of becoming members, and in order to become a member, you have to prove yourself.
So how many initiates would you say there are?
Or were.
When I left, there was more initiates than there were members. So that tells you anything. All it takes is one guy to snap in to do something like that. That's what Dylan Roof said. I'm tired of saying nothing but in the white nationalist community, so I'm going to take a stand, and I'm going to go into church, and I'm going to kill all these white people, because no one else is doing anything. Who knows, there could be another Dylan Roof and Adam Waffen.
They are continuing to grow. They're continuing to bring new people in. They're continuing. I mean, he was saying that there are more initiates, more people who want to get into the group than are actually in the group currently. And so we see this idea of lone wolf, and the results are well known, right? Tree of Life Synagogue, Pittsburgh, October 27th, 2018, 11 deaths, 6 injured. Chabad of Poway here, 2019, 1 death, 3 injured, including the rabbi. So as we talk about anti-Semitism from the right, this is what it looks like. This is what it becomes. Nan asks, how do we differentiate the radical left from those on the radical right? It's hard to tell. Usually it's in this type of ideology. The right still is focused on these lone wolf types of things. The left is actually focused on getting as many people together, as many protesters together, as many groups together, and making a noise that way. It's one of the ways to tell. But you also have to ultimately look at their philosophy to see where they're coming from. The left has a different focus, right? For the right, it's really going back to Hitler, to anti-Semitism that is racial based, to anti-Semitism that is economic based. That the Jews own everything and therefore we are suffering. For the left, for the most part, it's primarily focused on the state of Israel and Zionism. So it's another way, Nan, to sort of tell based on what are they arguing against. The far left, the anti-Semitism from the left tends to portray Israel as fascist. They portray Zionism as a colonialist and imperialist ideology. They argue that Jews are not really on the left because they support Israel. And if you support Israel, you can't be on the left. That's the exclusionary. Barry Weiss wrote, Hitlerian anti-Semitism announces its intentions unequivocally, but leftist anti-Semitism, like communism itself, pretends to be the opposite of what it actually is. So we have figures such as Linda Sarsour, who was the co-chairwoman of the Women's March in 2017. This was a very big incident that happened. It became very famous. And she wrote, when you talk about feminism, you're talking about the rights of all women and their families to live in dignity, peace, and security. It's about giving women access to health care and other basic rights. And Israel is a country that continues to occupy territories in Palestine. It just doesn't make any sense for someone to say, is there room for people who support the state of Israel and do not criticize it in the movement? There can't be in feminism. You either stand up for the rights of all women, including Palestinians, or none. There's no way around it. Now, what's interesting is half of what she wrote here is true and very acceptable, and half isn't. And the fact that it's mixed together is what makes it so difficult, right? Yes, one should stand up for all women everywhere, no matter what. And if there are women who are being mistreated, we should stand up about that. And when Israeli women are being raped, we should stand up about that, right? What makes this piece of it anti-Semitic is not that piece, that part of it. It's if you don't criticize Israel, then there's no room for you on the left. It's not about dialogue. It's not about, okay, we have different understandings. We have different beliefs. We want to support all women. And by the way, a lot of the Jewish women who wanted to be at this march and who couldn't be very much support Palestinian women who are suffering. But at the same time, they supported the land of Israel. And there was no space in that march for that. And that's what makes this so complicated and so difficult, is because many of us who are on the left agree with a good portion of what the radical left is saying, but they take it to a place that becomes untenable and exclusionary and anti-Semitic. Marge, you're muted.
If she's talking about supporting all women and the Arab, or that the Hamas mandate, whatever piece of it we want to look at, says they want to eliminate all women in Israel. So how does that fit?
I don't know that I don't know that that's what it says.
Well, I mean, they want Israel not to exist. Right.
But that's not directed particularly at women.
No, I'm saying, but women are part of that.
Well, yes, yeah, but it's not something that's specifically against women, and so it's a different.
But I don't. I mean, for me, I don't think you can separate out that is a tenet of it.
Yeah, I agree. Barb.
I guess my confusion or I guess response to kind of the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli marches are, there are many, many human rights violations in that part of the world. Many. Half the populations, most of those Arab countries don't have the rights that they want the Palestinians to have. And they, you know, and if you open your mouth in any of those other countries, you're not going to have it open for very long.
Yeah.
So it's,
yeah, I don't want to cut you off, Barb, but
yeah.
This is going to be the focus of next week of
next week.
speaking specifically about Israel. What I'm trying to do today is really show the difference between anti-Semitism on the right and on the left in general. And then next week, we're going to really focus in on what's going on in Israel and all of that. So I agree with what you're saying, but I want to save some stuff for next week.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay. So that was the first piece. The next piece we sort of saw, and we still see to some degree, it's lost a little bit of its luster right now in terms of the focus. But for a long time, the BDS movement was really pushing through an agenda that was highly problematic. It was founded by Omar Barghouti. He was a Palestinian who was born in Qatar. He moved to Israel in 1993. He's actually been in prison in Israel since 2017. Actually, did he get let out in the last piece? I don't think so. They were talking about letting him out. I don't know, Elliot may know off the top of his head if he got let out. I don't think so.
Are you thinking of Marwan Barghouti?
Oh, that's who I'm thinking of. Thank you. I'm mixing them up. Thank you. I'm conflating the two.
Marwan is still in prison
He's
and
still in
will
prison.
probably never get out unless they let him out in order to become the next Palestinian leader.
Right. Thank you. I'm conflating the two of them. From their own website, right? BDSmovement.net, boycott, divestment, sanctions movement works to end international support for Israel's oppression of Palestinians and pressure Israel to comply with international law. Now, in and of itself, okay, if you feel that there is oppression that's happening, this is a legitimate potential way to go about doing it, but it's actually morphed into something else entirely. It's taken root in college campuses. It's actually a very well-organized, funded campaign. It's not a grassroots effort. It very often portrays itself on college campuses as grassroots, but it is a business, and it is being run by anti-Israel and anti-Semitic organizations who are looking for the destruction of Israel and the destruction of Jews. Let's say for a moment, which I do not, so please do not take this out of context. Let's say for a moment you're arguing that Israel is apartheid, right? And the way that we argued that South Africa was apartheid. Nobody argued for the destruction of the state or the country of South Africa. They argued for that injustice to be fixed. So, if you are coming from the perspective that there is injustice that is being done to the Palestinian people in Israel, then argue for that injustice to be fixed, not for the state of Israel to not be there. Once you argue that second piece, it is no longer legitimate criticism, it is now anti-Semitism. They try to interfere with any program that creates an app and anything that they can do to create an atmosphere of discomfort for Jews. They try to make it uncomfortable, which is part of the conversation now that we've been seeing, and ultimately that led to the congressional hearings with Harvard and with MIT. They're trying to create an atmosphere of fear and an atmosphere that will make it so that Jews don't feel comfortable being Jewish. Again, nothing to do with Israel. Nothing to do with Israel. If ostensibly you're arguing against the injustices that are happening in Israel, I'm not an Israeli. When you direct that at me, I'm not a part of the government. I can't vote in Israel. Even if you say, you know, the Netanyahu government is the worst government in the world, I can't do anything about it. I'm not an Israeli. So when you aim that at me, you're not aiming that at me because I'm Israeli. You're aiming that at me because I'm a Jew. That's anti-Semitic. According to the ADL, the predominant drive of the BDS campaign and its leadership is not the criticism of policies, but the demonization and delegitimization of Israel. That is what makes it anti-Semitic. We'll learn about the 3Ds next week. BDS does not want to change Israeli policies. It wants to eliminate Israel. And how do we know that? We know that because it does not only question the occupation in Judea, Samaria, but the entire land of Israel. We know that because it does not criticize any other nations over their treatment of the Palestinians, only Israel. We know that because they do not criticize Hamas or Hezbollah over their treatment of the Palestinians, right? There are documented, and everybody knows it, human rights violations going on by Hamas to their own citizens. Nobody says anything. Therefore, it's hard to make the argument that you care and you're doing this for the betterment because you want to stand up against human rights violations. You only want to stand up against human rights violations that you perceive coming from Israel, not other ones. Political criticism is legal. Race-based commercial discrimination is not. What does it look like?
Intifada! 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 From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
So first of all, let's define some terms to make sure that everybody understands this. And again, we'll talk more about this next week as well, right? Intifada is armed struggle. And it is the intention, by the way, of many of those who support Intifada, certainly the stated intention of Hamas, not just Intifada against Israel, but to globalize the Intifada against the United States. Because I guarantee you, if you look carefully, they don't show it often, but if you look carefully, when they're burning an Israeli flag, they're burning an American flag right next to it. And so Intifada is this idea of militarized struggle that they want to be globalized. Also, we've heard this very often, the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There's some interesting study that's been done. That a lot of people who say that actually don't know what river and what sea they're talking about. I've seen that in a number of different places where they actually are on college campuses and they ask somebody who's saying it, so what river and what sea, and they're talking about all sorts of different places. But what from the river to the sea means is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. They're not talking about Gaza and the West Bank. They're not talking about a two-state solution. They're talking about the elimination of the state of Israel. And there's no getting around that. That is what that means. So we're left with questions, right? This new anti-Semitism leaves us with questions that we, as thinking people, moral people, have to struggle with and have to be honest about. When is something free speech and when is it hate speech? It's something that the presidents of those universities are struggling with right now and trying to come up with an answer. And they haven't been able to, or the answer was, it depends on the context, I guess. But there needs to be a clearer understanding of what is free speech, what is incitement and hate speech. When is critique of Israel justified and acceptable in a free society? And when is it anti-Semitism? I am not one who believes that anybody who says anything negative about Israel should be called anti-Semitic. I actually think that creates huge problems for us in the Jewish community. First of all, it's not true. And second of all, when we can't define what is anti-Semitism clearly, we have no way of actually fighting it. When we say anything we don't like is anti-Semitism, when we call anybody who disagrees with us a Nazi, we actually forget what Nazis really are and what that means. And so we need to truly understand, what does it mean to be in a free democratic society, which Israel is and the United States is, not all parts of the world are, to be able to freely critique whatever you want to critique. But when
If it
does
were
that
true,
what?
if it were true, then the vast majority of Israelis would be anti-Semites.
That is true, because they like to critique Israel more than anything else. Like I said earlier on, it's a sport. Critiquing the government is a sport in Israel. And finally, right, this leaves us with the question of, how do we respond to this new reality of anti-Semitism now, both on the right and on the left? For the first time, it's not just, oh, the Nazis are trying to kill us, let's deal with that, or one or the other. It's everything all at once, right? At the same time, we are, I went to the mayor's State of the City address this year, and there were protesters that were outside, accusing the mayor of supporting genocide because he supports Israel and has made statements in support of Israel. And right at the same time that that's happening, the Goyim Defense League is putting out their flyers about about Jews trying to take over the world and all of those sorts of things. We have it on the right and on the left, and it's simultaneous.
Rabbi, I'm not sure, you may have touched on this, but I found fascinating. I think it's Yair Rosenberg in The Atlantic who writes so well about anti-Semitism. Maybe I read it somewhere else, but for the folks on the right, like in Charlottesville, the Jews are not white and looking to replace whites. And for folks on the left, we are white and looking to replace the indigenous people of color in Palestine. So we are both and neither at the same time.
Correct. Well, and when you hate somebody, you turn them into everything you hate, whether it's real or not. So yeah, that's very good. I like that. Any other comments or questions for the last couple of minutes? Next week, we will focus our entire hour on Israel, and we will learn about Zionism. We will learn a little bit of history and talk about, what do we mean as Jews when we talk about Zionism? When we say, I am a Zionist, what does that mean? Not what do they say it means, but what do I say it means when I say I'm a Zionist? And try to understand that. And then we will try to understand how to make that division when you're talking to somebody. Are they critical of Israel? Are they anti-Semitic? And how do we actually define that and figure that out? Peter and then Neil.
I just want you to look around Romper Room here and look at the average age of the people here and realize you're talking about something to people who are already worried about this. Where are the kids? And BDS is doing such an excellent job brainwashing our kids on college campuses that they don't know what to believe, and we don't combat it well enough. And
So,
I've sat through a
yeah.
bunch of meetings here in New York on those subjects, and we're just not combating it well
Yeah.
at all.
So Peter, so first of all, I will say that the kids that are in college and the young kids, for the most part, don't want to be in the same class with the rest of us. So that's number one. Number two, these are conversations that we're having. I've had numerous conversations with Beth students in college via Zoom since October 7th to help them, to answer their questions, to give them a sense that they're not alone when they're out there, to help direct them to resources within their communities, so that they can do that. The reality is, and this is one of the mistakes that we make, like we hear that there's anti-Semitism on UCSD campus. And so a bunch of us show up and say, and try to fight that. Meaningless. We can't come in and fight that battle. We need to allow our students to develop their skills and to be able to figure out how they want to fight that battle. And very often we go in there and we say, well, we're going to go and we're going to march, and it actually does more harm than good. I mean, I'm an alumni, so maybe I've got a little bit of clout, but not really. The only thing I can say is I'm not going to support the university financially. That's all they care about from me. But Hillel, for example, is working with these kids, and they're actually fighting an incredible fight on our campuses. And they're outnumbered and they're outvoiced, and yet they're still fighting that fight. Barb or Neil, I can't remember who it was now.
Doesn't matter. I have a similar thought as Peter. I don't understand how pretty much out of nowhere all of these students decided they're going to be pro-Palestinian in a majority and be very vocal. With this disinformation campaign, and it seems to me very well organized and probably very well funded, to have so much power and voice now from a minority, what used to be a minority point of view.
Yeah. So you are correct in your observations. This is not out of nowhere. Noah Tishby spoke here in San Diego last year, and she said this in other places as well, right? The BDS movement and those people who are working against Israel have been working patiently, adeptly, clearly for 20 years to get us to this point. This is not just in the last couple of years, this appeared out of nowhere. This has been going on and has been a movement that has been well thought, well strategized, well funded for a very, very long time. And we Jews, and Peter sort of used those words, and I'll agree with him, we're late to the game here. We did not respond to it earlier, and we're struggling now to respond to it. For those who are on the left and would like to hear an interesting, powerful understanding of Israel and how to defend Israel from a left-wing perspective, you should read Noah Tishby's book. She is on the left. She's an actress in Hollywood. She's Israeli. She's on the left, and she wrote this book ostensibly for her left-wing colleagues. Try and understand Israel. It's called The Most Misunderstood Country in the World. It's really fabulous, and I highly encourage everybody, if you haven't read it, to read it. Nan, and then Elliot.
So when you show that quote by the woman who was
No, she's not. She's good.
Okay. So, he's my protector.
Thank you, Kurt.
This whole concept of occupation, I find it very confusing.
Let's talk more about it next week when we talk about Israel specifically. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it is it is a challenging concept because the word changes meaning depending on your narrative. And so it's difficult to focus in on defining what does that mean. And yeah, it depends on, that's a major part of it. So we will talk about it, Nan, next week. Elliot, I'll give you the final word, Elliot, because we're almost out of time.
Okay, I just wanted to push back a little bit on the us being outnumbered narrative. I strongly disagree that the majority out there is anti-Israel, even of the younger generation. Social media is not real life. Online is not real life. Twitter, TikTok, they're not real life. If you see a lot of the other side or the anti-side online or elsewhere, it doesn't mean that they're actually the majority. They just happen to be very loud, and maybe they get more reach because of algorithms. But you need only look at polls since October 7th about the majority of Americans that stand with Israel and with Israel's objectives in the war. And even within the last 2 weeks, a poll done by Harvard, no less, found that nearly 80% of Americans are with Israel since October 7th in their war against Hamas. And in the younger generation, it was a strong majority of those people as well. You can look up the poll that's in the news the last 2 weeks. It was conducted by Harvard and somebody else. And I admit that it was astonishing to see those numbers, but it was also very reinforcing to say that, just because we see a lot of these loud anti-Israel voices does not mean that they are winning the day.
So here's what I will say with you. I agree with your assessment now. My fear and the challenge is that I believe that TikTok and social media, they may not be real life, but they are creating real life. And 20 years from now, the people that they have created will be real life. And that's what I'm worried about, right? That's what I'm worried about as this continues. Howie, if it's short.
Yeah, just to go back to something in the beginning, does the ADL classify the activities or the activities of the three presidents as anti-Semitic?
Yeah, I think you were in the other room listening to your wife, which as you should. But I did answer that. I said I don't think that those are in the numbers, but it's a good question. We need to ask it.
Okay.
All right. Next week we will talk about Israel and we will focus. And then the week after we have two more sessions. The week after, we're going to really open it up to more of a conversation and a discussion about what do we do, and what can we do, what should we do, and how do we as Jews. One of the things, unfortunately, given our history, going all the way back to the early parts of our stories that we talked about, we as Jews have always been able to find hope in the midst of difficult times. And so how do we find that hope in today's world? How do we actually say, it's difficult right now to be a Jew. There are people that are, asking me if it's okay to take down their mezuzah off of their door because they don't feel comfortable having a mezuzah out there. People are hiding their Jewish stars, their Magen David, they're, wearing hats instead of having a kippah. They don't want to be visibly Jewish, not just in Europe, which has been the case for a long time, but here in the United States and here in San Diego also. And those sorts of anti-Semitic incidents are still happening. There was a swastika at Torrey Pines High School, within the last number of months. In a middle school, another kid, and this was probably ignorance, but another kid decided to give a Jewish kid a Hitler salute. These things are happening today in our neighborhood. This isn't just, oh, this is over in Israel, this is here now, and we as Jews need to deal with it. And so how do we deal with it is going to be a major question. All right, my friends, I always struggle giving classes like this because I feel like I always want to leave people on a high, and it's always so difficult after a class like this. But there is hope. There is hope, and there is ways to look and to move forward, and we will work together to find them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Kornberg.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.